Our grandson is coming home, so let's have steak again today. Quick, order the catering for my in-laws' house. We get steak through catering once a month as a treat. A biting chill filled the room. Wait, what about mine? How many times has this happened? Every time. There's no steak set aside for me. My mother-in-law always lets me place the order, and after I've done all the work, there's nothing for me. She's so demanding, and I just can't bring myself to stand up to her. I guess I'll just have to endure it again. Just as I was about to give up, I heard a voice say, "Grandma's really mean, isn't she?" What? I'm Reina, a 38-year-old housewife with no particular talents. After struggling to find a good match, I turned to a matchmaking service and met my current husband, Craig. Desperate for marriage, I had almost given up hope until I met a man who shared my love for movies. We clicked on our first movie date, enjoyed a smooth courtship, and got married. Although Craig, who is 2 years older, was initially kind, his demeanor changed drastically after our son was born. Our marriage grew strained due to two major changes. First, our son's IQ suddenly skyrocketed as he grew. By 3rd grade, he was handling subjects at an 8th grade level, and by 5th grade, he was fluent in 5 languages, thanks to his love of reading. Unfortunately, his extraordinary intelligence led to bullying, and he stopped attending school, thanks to a suggestion from his teacher. He's now studying at Cambridge University in England. The second change was moving into my in-laws' house. When our son went abroad, Craig's job required us to move closer to his parents' home. As a housewife, I had little choice but to follow. I didn't realize this would mark the start of a challenging life. When we moved in, only my mother-in-law was living there, as my father-in-law was in the hospital. "My health isn't great, so I need you to take on more responsibilities," she told me on my first day. Yet, she seemed far from ill, appearing more energetic than I felt. How old are you, mother-in-law?" 64 this year, Craig answered with a hint of irritation. "Really, she doesn't seem sick at all. In this house, whatever mom says goes. Don't question her, or you'll be in trouble." Hearing that from Craig made me feel incredibly isolated. I could sense my mother-in-law's hostility towards me, but I never expected Craig to abandon me like this, even though our marriage had cooled significantly. "Come on, Reina, get to work. Since you'll be staying here, start by cleaning the floors with this mop." My mother-in-law handed me an old mop and bucket, and I looked around at the layers of dust everywhere. It was obvious that the place hadn't been cleaned properly in a long time. I was thinking of using the vacuum cleaner first to deal with the dust. I suggested. "Don't use modern tools," she snapped. "Just use the mop." Despite the vacuum cleaner sitting unused in the corner, my mother-in-law was adamant. I sighed and replied, "Understood." "Could you handle this part while I work on the other?" I asked my husband, hoping for some help, but my mother-in-law cut him with a sharp look. "What are you talking about? Craig and I will be chatting and resting here. You're on your own." The house was enormous, 6 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. It was overwhelming to think of cleaning it all by myself. "Also, the dishes need to be done," she added. I was already struggling with the floor cleaning, and now there were more tasks piling up. "I can't manage everything. The house is too big." "Oh, really? Then I'll let you use the vacuum for $10 every 10 minutes, she offered with a smirk. "That's too expensive." "You can't even afford $10. What a poor daughter-in-law." My husband didn't move to help, and I felt humiliated as my mother-in-law belittled me in front of him. To make matters worse, he added, "It doesn't look good to squat and talk while mopping." The lack of conversation, when it was just the two of us, was manageable. But now, living with his parents, his coldness felt like psychological abuse. "Let's order steak today. I know a great place," my mother-in-law said, arranging for catering. Exhausted, I finally finished the cleaning and dishes. Just as I completed the chores, the catered steak arrived. I had worked hard for this moment, and my anticipation was high. My mother-in-law had promised an expensive steak, and I couldn't wait to taste it. My stomach growled with excitement as I thought about the meal. "Reina, pour some water, please." My mother-in-law's voice was as cold as ever, but I endured her commanding tone for the promise of steak. I adored filet mignon, and that anticipation kept me going. After filling the glasses, I saw the catered steaks neatly arranged on the table. "Wow, it looks amazing. Thank you, mother-in-law," I said with genuine excitement. "Excuse me, what are you talking about? There's no steak for you," she replied, her expression puzzled. "What do you mean there's none for me?" My heart sank at her words. "I've cleaned the floors and done the dishes. I explained weakly, but she retorted, "That's just what you're supposed to do. It's only fair. Considering you're staying here, think of it as paying for your stay. Did you think you could live here for free?" Since moving into my in-laws' house because of Craig's job, life had become unbearable. I didn't have the means to support myself independently. My monthly allowance was only $200, which barely covered clothes, cosmetics, and necessities. My savings from before marriage had been depleted by moving costs and my father's surgery. I had been naive to think that being a housewife would offer security. "So what about my dinner?" I asked, feeling my worth diminishing in her eyes. "Let me think for a moment." Her hesitation stung, and I felt increasingly devalued. "There are some noodles in the pantry. You can eat those," she finally said. While the table was filled with high-quality steaks, I was left with a simple bowl of noodles. The disparity made my place in this family painfully clear. They ate their steaks in silence, never offering me a bite. "Raina, wash this knife and fork thoroughly," my mother-in-law commanded. The closest I came to the steak was when I cleaned the utensils after their meal. From the very first day, the mistreatment had been relentless, leaving me both mentally and physically drained. One day, amidst the endless cycle of chores, I received a call from our son who was studying abroad. "Mom, it's been a while. Hey, you were really good at hand embroidery, right?" Where is this coming from?" "I wouldn't say I'm good, but I do it as a hobby." "Really, hand embroidery is quite popular here in America now, and your work came to mind. There are specialty stores here. But even looking back, the quality of your embroidery was exceptional." His unexpected praise warmed my heart. It had been so long since anyone had complimented me, and I couldn't help but shed a few tears. "Thank you." Only Leo would say something like that. My son, who seemed to sense my emotions, asked, "Mom, is something wrong? Your voice is trembling." "What?" My son, studying psychology, had become adept at understanding human emotions and mental states. With an IQ of 200, his insights were uncanny. I felt exposed as he saw through my struggles. "Did something happen with Dad?" he asked. I took a deep breath and, though feeling ashamed, shared the difficulties I was facing with my in-laws. It was comforting to have someone to confide in. "It's been tough every day," I said. After hearing my story, he promised, "I'll come home during our vacation, and I'd saved up some money from my part-time job." I tried to assure him that everything was fine, but he was insistent. "My son is coming home soon." As the call ended, I felt rejuvenated, but when I hung up, my mother-in-law approached with a scowl. That was quite a long and luxurious phone call. The warmth I gained from speaking with my son quickly faded under her glare. "I'm sorry. Never mind that. We're hosting a block party tomorrow. I need you to handle the shopping," my mother-in-law instructed, handing me a long list of items. At the bottom of the note, she added, "And make sure to book state catering." The day of the block party arrived, and guests began arriving in the afternoon. Before long, there were 10 people gathered. Everyone referred to my mother-in-law as the president. "Raina, what are you standing around for? Serve juice to the guests," she ordered sharply. Regardless of who was around, my mother-in-law made sure to use me as her personal servant. "Lauren, don't ignore the girl. It's sad to see how poorly she's treated. You should be kinder to your daughter-in-law." Some guests tried to speak up on my behalf. However, my mother-in-law was not pleased and retorted, "If you keep talking like that, you're no longer welcome at the block party. No more premium steak for you. Is that what you want?" Under her threat, the supporters quickly backtracked. "That's too harsh. We love this community. We're sorry." "Raina is my name." Yes, Raina. We can't go against the president," they agreed, their support vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. My mother-in-law seemed to have a grip, not only on our household, but on the entire neighborhood. As a simple housewife, I felt powerless against her. When the steak arrived, my mother-in-law began to arrange it on the table with evident pleasure. The steak was indeed luxurious, accompanied by high-end sides like caviar and truffles. Yet, even in this moment of abundance, she found a way to belittle me. "You think you deserve to eat this fine steak as a wife. You're nowhere near deserving it. You won't get any this time either." Her words cut through the air, and the sympathetic glances from the onlookers only deepened my humiliation. No one dared to challenge her. I watched my husband quietly enjoy his steak, feeling a pang of envy. Surely, a small piece wouldn't hurt, would it? I hesitated, feeling increasingly frustrated. "Of course, it would be unacceptable, but I'm not heartless. I bought beef noodles for you instead," she said, handing me a serving of beef noodles. Although an upgrade from ordinary noodles, it was a far cry from the steak I craved. At last, I could no longer hold back my frustration and raise my voice. Mother-in-law, this is too much. I have put so much effort into preparing for today's block party, and yet this is how I'm treated. So, is it true you did all this by yourself, Rena? Someone asked, their voice filled with surprise. Lauren, couldn't you show a bit more kindness? I said, hoping to draw attention to my mother-in-law's harsh treatment. The guest's gazes shifted toward her, clearly uncomfortable. Don't get too carried away, or you'll end up treated just like this useless son's wife, my mother-in-law retorted, her tone steely. Her intimidation was effective. No one dared to speak up. Rena, remember what I told you. You must obey mother in this house, my husband said suddenly, raising his voice. I flinched at his sharp tone, taken aback by his unexpected outburst. Obey mother's instructions, without question. The room fell silent, and those who had previously shown support for me now echoed, yes, yes, Lauren is right, aligning themselves with my mother-in-law's stance. Frustrated and defeated, I fled to my bedroom and locked the door behind me. I lost track of time and must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, the block party was over, and it was already dark. I checked my phone to find an email from my son. Mom, I'm coming over tomorrow. He was already in America and staying in a hotel. I went back to sleep, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. The next morning, I found my mother-in-law preparing breakfast in the kitchen. You really pushed your luck yesterday, she said, launching into her criticism without a greeting. I'm sorry, I said, bracing myself for her next words. I informed her about my son's arrival. Oh, if he's coming, we'll have steak tonight, she said, visibly excited. She had already arranged for catering from our usual steakhouse. When evening arrived and my son walked through the door, the dinner table was filled with an extravagant spread of steaks. Help yourself to as much as you like, my mother-in-law said, beaming. As usual, I was relegated to the role of a servant. Thank you, but where's Mom's portion? My son asked, noticing that there was no steak for me. Concerned, he turned to my mother-in-law. Oh, that's not an issue. Rena is always like this. Anyway, try this made with beef from Nebraska, my mother-in-law said, eager to showcase the meal. Despite her enthusiasm, my son responded with unexpected firmness. I don't want it. Why didn't you prepare anything for Mom? This is unfair, he said coolly. My mother-in-law was caught off guard by his reaction, and my husband looked equally surprised. What are you talking about, Grandma? Mom has told me everything. You really do look down on her, don't you? My son said, his voice steady and assertive. Feeling cornered, my mother-in-law began to panic. Oh, what did you hear? I didn't do anything. Grandma, you're being mean. You always put Mom down. People who act superior usually lack self-confidence or something to be proud of. They belittle others to feel better about themselves. It's a mean personality. Leo, just because you're young doesn't mean you can say whatever you want. Then what about a grandma who can't distinguish right from wrong? My son's rebuttals continued, leaving my mother-in-law increasingly defensive and cornered. Isn't this blatant discrimination? Everyone here gets their share of steak, but Mom gets nothing. This kind of thing usually leads to conflict. I've seen it happen many times, my son said, his gaze piercing and unyielding. My mother-in-law, taken aback by the intensity in his eyes, grew noticeably subdued, but my son wasn't finished. You're clearly agitated. I can tell from your eye movements, habits, and even the sweat on your forehead. I'm studying psychology at Cambridge University, consistently at the top of my class, and I work closely with a professor. I encounter all kinds of personalities, and Grandma, you display classic signs of a dictator. A dictator. My mother-in-law's face revealed a mix of surprise and discomfort, clearly unprepared for such direct criticism from her grandson. Yes, a dictator. Your agitation is evident. Maybe no one has ever confronted you so openly before. That's. My son had taken control of the conversation completely. I could only watch as he continued, with my husband mirroring my own stunned silence. But honestly, why is everyone so afraid of you? By the way, Grandma, what are you actually good at? Good at, well, You've been harsh with Mom, despite having no notable talents yourself. That's not fair. Mom has her own skills. That's harsh. Must you say it like that? My mother-in-law was increasingly cornered, her responses faltering. My son showed no mercy. Harsh. What you've done, Grandma, is far worse. Mom has a talent for embroidery that could even be sold in England. I was taken aback by my son's acknowledgement of my hobby. It was the first time someone had truly appreciated it. So what's your point? Don't you see? Mom has skills that surpass yours, yet you try to belittle her and assert dominance. It seems you can't accept someone being better than you because you feel inadequate. Grandma, you're the weakest one here. My mother-in-law was left speechless, her mouth hanging open. The truth of my son's words was undeniable, and she couldn't muster a response. And you, Dad, what have you been doing all this time? Why haven't you supported Mom when she's been struggling? Well, You couldn't stand up to Grandma, could you? Maybe it's because she's your mother. But if that's the case, why did you marry her in the first place? My husband was at a loss for words, unable to counter my son's legitimate questions. Among everyone present, my son remained the calmest and most insightful. In the end, both you, Dad, and Grandma are just bullying Mom without any real justification. You only seek to feel superior by putting others down. I want no part in such behavior. My son's relentless words left my husband and mother-in-law visibly shaken. They were silent, their faces set in rigid lines, unable to refute his piercing observations. My son's words had struck a nerve, and they were left with nothing to say. I was filled with joy as I watched my son, who had grown into such a remarkable young man. Then he turned to me and said, "Mom, let's leave this house and move to England together." "England, but we don't have the money, and finding a job there will be difficult," I replied. My son, who had been serious until now, began to smile. "Actually, one of my classmates has a father who's a Hollywood actor. I showed him pictures of your embroidery, and he was impressed. When his father heard about it, he was interested too." "Really? That's wonderful." "Yes, they want to buy your work, and there's now a waiting list of over 200 people for your pieces," my son continued. My mother-in-law and husband, who were listening in, looked astonished. "Mom, I took the liberty of arranging this, but they want you to open a store with your handmade crafts. The actor's father will cover all expenses, including relocation. So, let's turn your hobby into a business in the UK." My son's eyes were bright with excitement. It was surreal to think that something I did for fun could become my job, especially in England. I took a moment to think as my mother-in-law and husband watched me intently. "All right," I said finally. You're not serious, are you? You can't actually be going through with this," my mother-in-law and husband exclaimed with alarm. I considered their reactions carefully. My son was right. If I was going to endure harassment at my in-laws' house, I might as well turn my hobby into a career. My relationship with my husband had deteriorated due to his coldness, and I felt it was time to move on. "I'll give it a try," I declared. My son was overjoyed, while my mother-in-law and husband looked on in shock. I decided to be straightforward. "That's it. I'm divorcing you. I'm tired of living under your oppression and your mother's tyranny. I want to be free." My husband, resigned, simply said, "All right." My mother-in-law continued to rant, but I ignored her and barely remember what she said. The divorce was finalized quickly, and I was finally free from my in-laws' house. Now, in England, I'm busy preparing to open my shop. I've insisted on crafting all the products myself, and it feels like the most fulfilling time of my life. My son has been a tremendous help, even assisting with the shop's interior decoration. I later learned from my son that shortly after I left for England, my former mother-in-law had an accident at her home and ended up in the hospital. My ex-husband, unsure of what to do, called an ambulance. As she was being taken away, she continued to vent her frustrations, which led the block party members to finally distance themselves from her. They had only followed her out of fear. Apparently, my ex-husband has been handling all the housework alone since her hospitalization and has taken on a late-night, part-time job to cover the additional expenses. My former mother-in-law's condition, given her age, might mean a long recovery with ongoing care needed. It's going to be challenging for them, but I hope they manage. Meanwhile, I'm focused on my work and excited for the shop's opening. Although moving abroad was daunting at first, my son's wholehearted support has been reassuring. He rescued me from a difficult situation with my in-laws, and now, as his mother, I am determined to support him as I complete the final touches on my last piece.